Thank you, and welcome to the Center of Urban Horticulture, which is part of the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences of the College of the Environment of University of Washington. I'm really personally interested in the particular topic today for a whole number of reasons, and I'm interested in it from the standpoint that a lot of my academic life has been about carbon exchange and the role that different kinds of plant and tree stresses have on that exchange. But I'm also, as a person who's been leading a field trip course for the last almost 14 years, interested in the sort of condition of forests. And I'm interested in our thought processes as we think about different elements that we might put into the tool bag that one uses in stewarding forests, in keeping forests either in their various different kinds of ownership, including private ownership and private use. And I see today's conversation being really important as we talk about the carbon cycle and we talk about the health of forests and how these things all may interplay as we move forward into in the next time period. There's been what I regard an interesting anthropogenic convergence on our forest systems. Washington State is blessed with about 50% forest cover that's managed by a whole range of different jurisdictions, agencies, and people. And we find ourselves in a discussion about the role of forest health or forest condition, forest resilience, renewable energy, socioeconomic benefits that can be derived from the forest, particularly in rural communities or in rural parts of the state. The role that altered climate, whether it's weather extremes, El Nino, La Nina cycles, or climate change, altered disturbance regimes, invasive organisms, including disease organisms and plants and animals, and then the whole aspect of multiple stakeholders. And there is, I think, the emerging realization that doing nothing has significant consequences on forest condition. And I would opt that doing nothing is not an option. I just took this picture of this ponderosa pine on the North Fork on a ridge above the North Fork of the Tanaway because ponderosa pine is the only green tree species left on this side of the south-facing slope. The grand fir, the Douglas fir, either spruce bugworm or tussock moth has pretty well decimated them. So now we now have a fuel or a fire hazard. This also was a very lovely tree, and it really indicates the resilience that ponderosa pine has in stressful sites. We're also up on Snowshoe Mountain where we're looking at the Engelmann spruce beetle and the decimation that's occurred on the more mesic side of this particular valley, and the other side of the valley is a younger lodgepole pine stand that came back following a fire. So fire as a disturbance regime is a natural component we can think about. So I see the discussion about carbon cycling and how forests are tended or stewarded in the future as being an integral part of the discussion that's being carried on today. I'm going to introduce Ellen Matheny at this point, who is actually going to introduce all the speakers and coordinate the rest of this program this afternoon.
The first speaker is Craig Partridge. He is the Director of Policy and Government Relations at the Washington State Department of Natural Resources in Olympia, Washington. Craig is a 30-year veteran of the Department of Natural Resources. Currently, Craig directs agency-wide activities in strategic planning, executive policy development, and special projects development, including Washington State Commissioner of Public Lands Peter Goldmark's Forest Biomass Energy Initiative. Craig holds a Master's of Science degree in Natural Resources Management and Political Science and a Bachelor of Science degree in Wildlife Sciences, both from the University of Washington. Please welcome Craig Partridge.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the non-academic panel. If you're keeping track, we've got one state bureaucrat, two industry folks, tribal, and NGO. So I think it must be a expectation on the part of the serious planners that the non-academics are either going to be able to keep you awake better at the end of the day, or have some hope of speaking in less than 10 minutes. And so we'll see if we do that. And I'm going to specifically talk about forests and energy, a little bit less so about carbon. And the question for me is, what is our approach to sustainability in Commissioner Goldmark's Forest Biomass Energy Initiative? He started this initiative almost as soon as he took office in January of 2009. 3 years in a row, we asked the legislature for legislation related to forest biomass and received it with large bipartisan majorities each year. The first one established 4 pilot projects to demonstrate different kinds of biomass to conversion technology ideas. We brought 2 to completion. One was the Borgford Biomass Project, Borgford Bioenergy Project in Stevens County that used slow pyrolysis to produce biochar and some energy to run a sawmill. The other was the Nippon paper mill combined heat and power plant up in Port Angeles. Then in 2010, we responded to what we were hearing from the industry in the way of the need for longer-term contracts for sale of forest biomass from state lands. And then in 2011, the legislature asked us to partner on bioaviation fuel, which I'll talk a little bit about at the end. The principles we have for the Commissioner's Biomass Initiative include several things that are important to us. We like the idea of sustainability of feedstock supply from over the long term from sustainable forest management. That's guided Commissioner Goldmark's initiative from the beginning. We promote appropriate scale and location of the production facilities, cautioning against either too large or too small a facility. And I think the greatest advantage is some combination of nearness to feedstock and nearness to transmission and transportation infrastructure. And we support high efficiency energy conversion. We're not big supporters of standalone biopower plants. We're more supportive of combined heat and power and biorefineries. And by implication of all of this, I think we stand for recognition that forest feedstocks are one among many bioenergy feedstocks. Are certainly not the answer and shouldn't be thought of that way. There's lots of players. Today's series can show you that there's plenty of players, plenty of potential partners, plenty of stakeholders, opinion leaders, and 1 or 2 academics. And so what's the Department of Natural Resources got to add to this mix? And what we think our distinctive role is trying to ensure forest and feedstock sustainability for forest biomass. Energy users don't want to have to worry about sustainability. They want to take it for granted. Production facility investors don't want to have to worry about forest sustainability. They want to take it for granted. Communities that are close to the forests and close to production facilities don't want to have to worry about sustainability. They want to take it for granted. So the Department of Natural Resources, we feel like it's quite appropriate for us not to necessarily worry about it, but to look into it and be able to speak with some authority and reliability on this. So what are we doing to promote sustainability, and what does that mean to us? First of all, we are continually saying what we believe to be true, that certainly in Washington State, biomass feedstocks are limited to logging residuals. Basically, that means slash piles, and forest health or fuel reduction thinnings. Not saw timber. It doesn't make any economic sense to think about burning up a saw log for biomass, and certainly not old growth forests. We are trying to stay as far away from any moral debates about old growth as we can, and we don't think it's necessary. The second thing that we have done is we asked for and received a federal grant to conduct a statewide all landowner supply study for forest biomass. And that was just completed recently by the University of Washington, working with TSS consultants that we competitively selected a couple of years ago. And the results of that study are pretty interesting. They studied biomass produced as a result of normal logging operations and forest health thinnings. What was found was that about a third of the biomass that was produced stayed scattered on the logging site and then added to the pre-existing biomass that was already there. So forest operations always add to the existing biomass, not take away from. About another third was brought to the logging, brought to the roads and landings, probably put in a slash pile, but wasn't accessible to the marketplace because it was just too far up the road and not economical to go after. And then the last third was actually piled in slash piles and available to the marketplace, but only about 15% of the total biomass that was produced by these operations was actually taken down the road to market in 2010, which was the base year. So what that tells us is that we can more than double the amount of biomass that's used without ever going past even the market available slash piles, and not necessarily trying to get to the more inaccessible slash piles, and certainly not the amount that is left scattered out in the woods. We have also started a multi-stakeholder group to talk about the forest practices rules. The Forest Practices Board passed a new rule that said that biomass removal is a forest practice, and so it's subject to all the forest practices rules that are designed to protect water quality and wildlife and public resources. And the stakeholder group has been meeting very often, long meetings, dedicated folks, some of you are here in the room, to try to decide if there are some additional tune-ups to the forest regulations in Washington to assure protection of public resources. We have also are working under the legislation that passed in 2010 to try to assure that we can deliver long-term contracts for biomass from state lands in a way that ensures ecological and operational sustainability. And then we have taken our occasional opportunity to participate in the national greenhouse gas emission policy debates, mostly by trying to inject some realism as to what kind of forest operations and what kind of forest materials are actually, at least in the West, likely to be used for bioenergy production, and then to advocate in the air quality regulatory arena for pragmatic and practical administrative systems. So the last thing then is our bioaviation fuel activities. The legislature in 2011 asked us to participate with some of the other major players that subsequently received major federal grants from USDA in conduct of a pilot project at a demonstration scale. So we're working particularly with WSU on that. But I think, again, what our role is perhaps we will be a landowner supplier of biomass, but primarily I think what we bring to the table is the ability to offer assurances that forest biomass as an energy feedstock supply can be provided in a sustainable way. So that, I think, concludes, and I'll look forward to answering questions when all the panelists are brought together again. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Patrick Mazza. He is the Research Director at Climate Solutions in Portland, Oregon. In 1998, Patrick co-founded Climate Solutions, which is a Pacific Northwest non-governmental organization dedicated to advancing practical global warming solutions in policy and business arenas. Patrick has sought answers to issues of ecological sustainability for over 30 years. In the 80s and 90s, he was an active participant in the fight to stop old-growth logging on national forests. With the recent startup of the Northwest Biocarbon Initiative, which is a collaborative effort led by Climate Solutions, Patrick holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Journalism from California State University, Long Beach. Please welcome Patrick Mazza.
Well, thank you very much to the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences for the opportunity to address the Denman Forest Series. I actually go between Portland and Seattle nowadays, so I'm kind of divided between ducks and dogs, but a little schizophrenic, but at least one or the other is going to have a winning team in any given year. So yes, I am going to talk about the Northwest Biocarbon Initiative, a new initiative that is founded by Climate Solutions and our partner groups, and the broader context of climate and carbon in which it's enmeshed. What is Climate Solutions? Who are we? We're a Northwest-based NGO. For 14 years, we've worked on global warming solutions, primarily in the areas of carbon pricing and clean energy. Right now, new science is telling us we've got to broaden our focus to biocarbon. So what is biocarbon? Very simply, it's the natural carbon storage in vegetations and soils accomplished through photosynthesis. What is the biocarbon imperative? What is the science telling us? Well, we used to think we could go to 450 parts per million in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and basically hold climate impacts within a reasonable bound. What's coming out in recent years is that being at 393 right now, we're over the line. And to restore a safe operating space for humanity, we need to go to 350. We need to find a way to get back. This involves two very large, very ambitious goals. One is to phase out the burning of fossil fuels, specifically to get out of unsequestered coal by 2030 and to really stop the development of tar sands and oil shales. This is the clarion call that came in 2008 from James Hansen and fellow scientists at Goddard Space Institute. If humanity wishes to preserve a planet similar to that on which civilization developed, into which life on Earth is adopted, paleoclimate evidence and ongoing climate change suggest that CO2 will need to be reduced from its then current 385 ppm to at most 350. Well, Hansen et al. took a look at what the planet looked like in the past when we had similar greenhouse gas levels to the level we have now and where we're going. Radically different world. Sea levels not just a few feet higher, but dozens of feet higher. It would not be the world we know. So what do we need to do? This chart shows, well, the first get out of fossil fuels as quickly as possible. That way we possibly can hold ppm to 425. And that's very ambitious, but we've got to think about truly ambitious goals when we're thinking about climate change. Second, we need to mobilize the power of the natural world to begin to actively soak out carbon dioxide and get ourselves down to 350. So that involves, for agriculture, conservation tillage, nutrient cycling, for cities, more green infrastructure, green features. And for bioeconomics, we need to eliminate the concept of organic waste and start cycling everything into bioenergy and biomaterials. Finally, carbon-rich forests. So what is the Northwest Biocarbon Initiative? It's an initiative, as you see there, to galvanize our biocarbon innovators. Our region has a bunch of them. Farmers, foresters, community leaders, thinkers, to demonstrate the essential role that natural systems can play in reducing atmospheric CO2 and bringing us to stability. Who are we? Well, these are the groups, some of the most innovative and visionary funders and conservation groups in the region. Some of them are in the room today. We have assembled a steering committee that is guiding this process. What do we do? Right now, we've been in operation now since about July 2010. We're still honing, but basically, right now we're communicating. We're communicating the opportunity and assembling an ecosystem of innovators to catalyze world-class initiatives that build the biocarbon economy, to pioneer model projects on the ground, to develop best practices, to create new revenue streams, and to advocate policies that fuel biocarbon innovation. Very related. For example, when a carbon tax returns to the table, and we are certain it will, when it does, we want part of the discussion to be direct payments, direct support for land use change, and bioeconomic development apart from offsetting systems. Offsetting systems neutralize current emissions. What we're talking about is different. We're talking about actively reducing carbon in the atmosphere. So why are we doing it? Why are we doing a Northwest-based thing? Well, that's how Climate Solutions works. We've worked from the bottom up on public policies ever since we started. And we take the bottom cities and states up to DC. I mean, but we start here. We have state and local governments, Oregon, Washington, California, that are in the forefront of climate policy and planning. We have rich natural resources, forests, farms, and other lands. And we are a center of innovation. We have some of the most innovative land conservation efforts in the country. We have green infrastructure and recycling efforts going on in cities. We have bioeconomy entrepreneurship, leaders nationally in biochar and ecological services markets. And finally, carbon storage in ecosystems is a very granular issue. So there's a natural bioregional scale on which to address this, to really develop the understandings we need. So what is the role of forests? Well, this study begins to tell us for a U.S. Forest Service study, Birdsley, 1992, Oregon, Washington, California, 20.5 billion metric tons of carbon, 20.5 gigatons. It's close to 2% of world forest carbon, 39% of U.S. forest carbon. So here's some really back of the envelope stuff, okay? 2.1 gigatons equals 1 part per million CO2 in the atmosphere. So we know that West Coast forests store an equivalent of nearly 10 parts per million CO2. It's generally understood that West Side forests, only about 20 to 25% of the original carbon remains. So a 10% increase in our current forest carbon storage, or a 2% increase in the original, will give us a ppm. Now we have to take full life cycles into account. If you've got a lot of nitrogen fertilizer going to grow trees, that highly potent nitrous oxide emission could defeat your carbon storage. But and what is our theoretical potential? Well, the Birdsley study showed a nearly 100% theoretical potential to build carbon in forests. So we know that it's out there. We have the potential to draw a ppm or more out of the atmosphere if we get at it. What are the key steps? Well, we do think we need to preserve what we have. We need to keep the carbon sinks, and that would involve probably these are the figures. Creating a monument or remissioning the Forest Service and the BLM to eco-services. For timberlands, here's where we get to the issues. It's our understanding that longer rotations, doubling, tripling the rotation time from the typical 40 years, and selective patchier cutting is the way to accumulate more carbon in forests. Now we're hearing the different issues and cases about that here today. We need this resolved. We need some understandings. We also need to develop ecosystem services markets that begin to value carbon, water, and biodiversity. One of the key points is that a lot of stuff we do for biocarbon a lot of stuff we do not necessarily for biocarbon will benefit biocarbon. Higher quality wood products, longer rotation wood also is another step. So these are forest science needs, forest soils, forest health thinning life cycle. Stay in touch with us. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Steve Rigdon. He is the Generation Manager at Yakima Power. the Yakima Nation's public power utility located in Toppenish, Washington. Steve is a tribal member of the Yakima Nation. His goal is to develop opportunities within renewable energy and utility formation with tribes throughout the United States. Steve has worked in natural resources for over 20 years with the Yakima Nation and the Bureau of Indian Affairs in forest management and resource protection. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in wildland and forest conservation from the University of Washington, and he's currently a graduate student in the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences. Please welcome Steve Rigdon.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm grateful that tribes are being considered in this conversation piece because they are, a part of our Northwest for thousands of years, and they have been stewards of this land, meeting their social needs. And with that, today there are challenges of continuing the balance with our social, environmental, and economic needs to meet our people of today and to protect opportunities and situations for future generations while recognizing and appreciating the sacrifices from the past. We all look at forest products as various rents or goods and services, and the Yakima people have done so for many thousands of years through food, shelter, medicine, tools, baskets, and there's been a transformation in the last 100 years of using wood products for saw logs, lumber, pulp, and now we're exploring opportunities in biomass and energy. Wood energy is a complex issue, as we've heard today, with all the various inputs and outputs of what goes into making energy from the sun through photosynthesis, through hydrocarbons and sugars that are available for, combustion for heat sources or transportation fuels. And it's difficult to make that complexity and understanding to tribal communities. They understand firewood, heat, electricity, generation, things like that. When it comes down to transportation fuels and some of the electrical, technologies, fluidized beds and the rest of it, it gets very difficult. And so there's a disconnect of where our energy comes from and who's supplying it and the benefits that are provided. The challenge is, especially in eastern Washington, eastern Oregon, is the lack of infrastructure. Due to regulation and many other economic, social, environmental situations, infrastructure has diminished. And the Yakima Nation has 2 of about 4 or 5 sawmills in eastern Washington. And that lack of infrastructure adds to the risk of transportation fuels. And so as the diesel prices go up, the cost of obtaining that material, the biomass, goes up with it, and who's going to bear that cost. And then so when you incorporate that with long-term feedstock agreements, there's a risk there between, is it going to be tied to the power purchase agreement, the developer, or the long-term contract for the feedstock itself. And so those risks are very difficult to get across. And so when you're dealing with biomass, it has to come out most effectively with saw logs and pulp. And so that infrastructure in place has to bring out the biomass material. And the slide on the bottom is the available resources as we look at not just taking in the forest residual, but there's a lot of agriculture residual and landfill residual. And so people are looking at blending those materials to waste to energy opportunities. Some of the other challenges is in the Northwest, especially if we're looking to make electricity out of wood materials, is that we are fortunate to have inexpensive hydro, natural gas, and wind energy. And so the cost of woody biomass energy is about 2 to 3, 4 times more expensive than the competing industry that's already been developed. And those have all ridden on subsidies, taxes, if you will, from the United States, with the dams, the bonding, the production tax credits with wind energy, and various subsidies with pipelines and the rest of it. And so biomass have had, their production tax credits, closed loop systems, and things like that. But it's difficult because tribes don't have access to these incentives because of their non-tax status. And so with more money coming in from the Department of Energy to nuclear, to natural gas, and not so much to renewables, it gets difficult for tribes and other people to develop that because of the cost. Looking at these projects just for a boiler switch project from an oil boiler to a wood boiler, you know, is a minimum of $10 million. And if you're looking to throw electricity on it, is about $15 million. And these are smaller 5, 10 megawatt projects. And if you're looking at commercial size, larger at 10, 20 megawatts, you're talking $50 to $90 million. And the collateral for that is very difficult to get through tribes because what are they going to put up? Are they going to put up their timberlands? Are they going to put up their casinos? And what are they going to leverage to bond that? And partnerships, people with tax appetites is an opportunity, but tribes want to keep the majority of the benefits to themselves, and so those partnerships aren't always so favorable, and so they choose not to have them, and so it falls back into, you know, the power purchase agreements, long-term feedstock agreements, and the ability to have the benefit and do the projects on their own standalone. And then it comes down to the process, and so we have to have the Indian agent or the Bureau of Indian Affairs overseeing a lot of our activities. And so we have to go through NEPA, FERC, and then you have Bonneville Power with the queue and putting the power on the grid, or these long-term agreements that, you know, to buy biofuels, and you always have to have your off-taker. And in the Northwest, it's difficult because there's dual processes with FERC, with the Northwest Power Act, and how tribes fit in that, because they weren't solely considered when these legislations and policies were put in place. And so we're going back trying to correct some of those situations. And then monetizing the intrinsic value. So we have a lot of ecosystem services that there are markets trying to be developed right now, but they're not. And so those incentives make it difficult until they're in place to make happen. But especially in Eastern Washington, it comes down to avoided costs. And so taxpayers are going to pay for fighting fire, and they're going to pay for the fire restoration, and they're going to environmental costs. And then also we've, you know, gone back and forth so much today about, you know, fossil fuels and the cost of that, and fighting wars and the rest of it. And then the forest health. We have mountain pine bark beetle, we have spruce budworm, we have tussock moth, and dealing with all the forest health issues and the restoration of those lands and those costs associated with that. And the values, we all want clean air, we all want clean water, and we are trying to create rural economies and get back to the tradition and cultures that we've all been a part of, not just as tribal people, but as Northwest people, with having jobs on the ground, out in the woods, taking care of our environment that suits our needs as local communities. And then it comes down to energy independence and sovereignty, being autonomous, being self-sufficient, and then providing all the rest of those ecosystem services that come with that. And so if you look at when the sun shines, you get solar power. When the wind blows, you have wind power. When the water flows, you get hydropower. But the biggest cost with biomass is, you know, obtaining the biomass itself. And when you look at power plants or biofuels, collecting that material, it's about 55%. And that dollar cycles through the economy. That goes back to those rural jobs, the truckers, the equipment operators, the guys on the ground, and then the peoples in the plants. And if you look in the slide in the Northwest, there are very few power plants that, because of the hydro and the wind and the rest of it, but it just shows that we have some of the most productive forests in the world, and yet we don't use it, you know, for energy purposes. And then we have to bridge a gap. It comes down to cultural and education gaps that the University of Washington is doing with the program that I've been involved with the bioenergy program. Of every tribe is unique, and so you can't come in there and have a cookie cutter approach and think that there's going to be one fit to all. And so you go in there, you do your resource assessments, and you figure out the best opportunities with the resources that they have hand, be it net distribution, size, scale, and using what's available there. And then, so for tribes to bridge that gap is, the technology disconnect, making that connection, access to the incentives, streamlining the processes, regional collaborations, and a societal commitment in investing domestically. I think we look at all the different taxes and subsidies and where our money goes, and it doesn't go into Washington State or the Northwest enough.
Our next speaker is Mike Jostrom. He is the Director of Renewable Resources for Plum Creek Timber Company and is based in Seattle. Mike is a leader on Plum Creek's business development team and is responsible for securing a positive policy and business environment for growing the renewable energy business. Mike has been with Plum Creek for over 30 years, working in forestry and timber management, habitat conservation planning, and recently led Plum Creek's forest productivity and harvest planning teams. Mike holds a Bachelor of Science degree in forest management from Washington State University and is a graduate of Harvard Business School's Program for Management Development. Please welcome Mike Jostrom.
Thanks, Ellen. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's great to be able to, as a landowner, to share some perspectives among such a knowledgeable group of people. It's actually kind of humbling. But I'd like to make a few points on the relationship between forest management and carbon mitigation, and then I'll discuss a couple considerations on a path forward. So first, a little bit about Plum Creek. As Ellen said, we're a large private landowner. We have 6.6 million acres in 19 states in the U.S., and we're primarily a landowner. We do have some manufacturing in Montana, but everywhere else that we own land, we just basically function as a forest landowner. And Plum Creek has invested over $500 million in the last decade in the health and productivity of our forests. So I realize in the title it may seem like kind of a stretch to say that we're vested in carbon, but basically we have a strong investment in wood, and wood represents a direct relationship with carbon that we're just learning about. After all, every extra pound of wood that you can grow represents additional carbon dioxide that can be pulled from the atmosphere and stored in a solid form in the form of wood, or else used to displace fossil fuels. So as a normal part of our business, we model our forest lands. We model all the inputs for growth, all the outputs of harvest, and then we model this forward. We have a group of biometricians that do this under different economic scenarios. And what this allows us to do is to balance harvests with growth and to plan for a sustainable future. And within the last year or so, we have also started building into into our inventory and planning systems the ability to measure for carbon. I do want to say a little bit about bioenergy as we get started here. Feedstock for bioenergy from forests is something that we're interested in. We're beginning to model for this, and we view it as an important emerging business opportunity for basically three reasons. One is it allows us to use more of every tree. Secondly, it provides new markets for low-quality fiber that allows us to do important things like thinning that improves forest health and forest productivity. And the third is that it can provide market diversity in a market for forestry products that's otherwise fairly fluid. So these are important, but what's really important to note is that that biomass for energy is a low-value product. When we incorporate it into our modeling, it really doesn't drive any measurable changes to our harvest regimes or changes our decisions on when to harvest. Basically, that's driven by the higher value products. So I want to make the point here on this slide that managing forests for wood is compatible with the goal of managing forests for carbon. The progress that working forests in the U.S. have made in the last half a century have built a strong platform that will serve carbon mitigation in the future going forward. So I'll repeat this fact that's been stated, is that the amount of carbon stored in U.S. forests has increased by over 50% in the last 50 years. This is a period of time when the U.S. population has more than doubled and the demand for wood products has been unprecedented. A number of factors contribute to this increase, but it's really clear that investments in forestry play a role. U.S. private working forests are more productive today than they've ever been. And this current productivity, high level of productivity in private forests, is a result of investments that have been made for decades. And the investments that we make today will benefit productivity decades in the future. In the U.S., private landowners invest now for a payback, an uncertain payback that comes decades later for markets that are basically unknown. So I also want to repeat that we hear that sustainable forestry in the U.S. is currently carbon beneficial. So what does this mean? Is it about the carbon stocks? As I have learned it, it's really about more than carbon stocks. We look at the forests. Growing forests are very effective at capturing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Wood products store carbon for a long time, and bioenergy reduces fossil fuel consumption. So I'd like to close my comments with just a few considerations for a forestry path forward. Of course, the first consideration is what we forest landowners must consider. A number of things that we can consider, but I list just a few here. Incorporating bioenergy into the forestry supply chain is the operational nitty-gritty. It's very important to do because our supply chain has been built for different and more conventional products. I also already mentioned modeling for carbon. As we build carbon metrics into our modeling systems and our forest inventory systems, we can better understand the relationships between the two. That'll help us to make these decisions on the proper levels of harvesting more informed. And then we must continue with investments in forests and in forest productivity. So this second point is something I think that we can all think about, that we really all need to pay attention to if the carbon benefits of forest are to continue to be fulfilled. As we develop public policy to ensure a low carbon future, it's critical that it be done in such a way that supports working forests and the practice of forestry. So I have three thoughts in this regard. First of all, carbon policy must recognize the carbon benefits of forests, wood, and bioenergy. It's a package deal. We manage all three together and we balance them all together. Secondly, I think that policy for carbon should avoid trying to govern land use through carbon policy. So if you look at the public discussion around bioenergy, for example, it's filled with hysteria about what's going to happen with forests if strong bioenergy markets are developed. Not only is this kind of hysteria unwarranted, but the fact of the matter is that we have other policy mechanisms that address these concerns. And so the third thought along this regard is that we must ensure that carbon policy pay attention to unintended consequences that could diminish the contribution of America's working forests. Forest owners should be encouraged by policy to continue investments in forests as forests and in investments that encourage forest health and productivity. So another way of thinking of that is that the leakage concept in this regard would mean reduced forestry investments and reduced productivity, and also the loss of forests to other uses. So that's the end of my comments. Thank you very much.
Our final speaker is Edie Sonne-Hall. She is the manager of sustainable forests and products at Weyerhaeuser Company in Federal Way, Washington. Her work focuses on forest carbon accounting and climate change policy, life cycle assessment and carbon footprint, ecosystem services, and overall corporate sustainability. Previously, she was a research forester for International Paper. Over the years, Dr. Sonne-Hall has been an active participant in various stakeholder groups on forest carbon policy, biomass initiative, and ecosystem services. She helps compile carbon footprint and life cycle data for Weyerhaeuser products and leads an internal team focused on how to measure ecosystem services on Weyerhaeuser's timberlands. Dr. Sonne-Hall holds a PhD and Master's of Science in Forest Resources, both from the University of Washington and a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Yale University. Please welcome Edie Sonne-Hall.
And guess what? I'm the last speaker. So it's really great to be here. Actually, the Center for Urban Horticulture holds a very special place in my heart. I was actually the graduate student speaker at the College of Forest Resources graduation ceremony back in 2001, which was just weeks after the Center for Urban Horticulture, the old building, was burned down by eco-terrorists. So I think it's really important and really special to be here. And by the way, I know Tom Hinckley did a study, and there were a lot of unnecessary carbon emissions emitted in that act. So I'm here to mitigate that. So we have been hearing about a lot of different ways that forests can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. And I just want to set the stage a little bit. So by 2050, there are expected to be 9 billion people in the world. And if we all are expected to have a per capita ecological footprint that we have today, that's going to require 3 Earths. So there's something that we need to do about this. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about possibilities. When you have an industry such as the forest industry that relies on a manufacturing cycle with a low or negative carbon footprint, the possibilities for providing products that help slow carbon dioxide accumulation in the atmosphere are endless. Through carbon storage, through replacement of fossil fuel, and through increases in efficiency. So some of my examples have not yet been quantified, but hopefully you'll get a sense of the possibilities that a tree can be to solve important problems for people and planet. So just a few things about Weyerhaeuser. We're over 100 years old, $6 billion in revenue, 13,000 employees, manage over 20 million acres of timberland worldwide, and our headquarters are just south of here in Federal Way, Washington. We have a lot of timber. We make wood products that are used in home buildings. We also build homes and developments. We manufacture cellulose fibers, which are also known as pulp, that are used in specialty products, in diapers, newspaper, publishing paper, liquid packaging boards such as milk cartons. Last year we started a new business called Weyerhaeuser Solutions, which is taking our expertise in land management and the ability to provide research at scale and offering it to clients. And then we also have a partnership with Chevron called Catchlight Energy, which is focused on developing the next generation of sustainable cellulose biofuels. This is our integrated company vision. This is what we are aiming for in everything we do in our sustainability strategy to provide superior sustainable solutions for the world. So this is Weyerhaeuser's version of our carbon cycle, and I'm just going to quickly go through it because you guys have been hearing it for the last couple hours. So trees grow, they absorb CO2 in the atmosphere. Now, you may think that our forests are continuing to increase our carbon storage in the atmosphere, but as we know, when we harvest trees, those emissions are re-released into the atmosphere, or they're stored in wood products. We do emit greenhouse gases in our manufacturing process, but we also build, we produce products that are, find their way into buildings and are stored. The carbon is stored in building products for decades or longer. We also use our residuals from the manufacturing process and the biomass that's emitted during that process can be used to replace fossil fuel. So we've got a net positive impact. But with that, we can always do more. And in 2006, Weyerhaeuser announced a greenhouse gas reduction commitment to reduce our direct and indirect emissions by 40% over a 2000 baseline by 2020. We're doing this by increasing efficiency in our manufacturing process and also by increasing our use of biomass energy. So I'm just going to put this graph out here. These are all of the different greenhouse gas emissions by source for the total United States based on 2010 data given by the EPA. And as you can see here, it's slightly different than Kate's version, but it's broken out by the actual source. And there are a lot of different ways over the next few slides that I'm going to tell you that Weyerhaeuser is working on products that can help reduce emissions in each of these sectors. So, real estate solutions. We have a Living Smart program where we are increasing our efficiency in the actual building, and that increases the efficiency in the operating energy. We're building about 15% higher than energy code. Wood product solutions. So as we've heard in many of the presentations, wood has a low embodied carbon material, and that has a really important benefit. Weyerhaeuser also provides a suite of building solutions with panelized systems in panelized walls and floors, and also we have a software program called Javelin that allows builders to choose exactly the amount of material that they need. This reduces on-site construction waste. So you've got more of the material going into a building and less going into a landfill. It's increasing efficiency. There's a lot of stuff that can happen in cellulose fibers, and we've talked a little bit about this. One of the things is that lignin, which is a byproduct of the pulping manufacturing process, can potentially be a replacement for lightweighting autos and wind turbines. And in August of 2011, Zoltech was awarded a Department of Energy grant to look into low carbon fiber, and Weyerhaeuser is a partner in that research project. We also have developed a new brand of pulp called Pearl, and this has a more absorbable processes, and it makes better use of the actual yield, so you get more out of it with less material, and has a better environmental footprint compared to traditional pulp manufacturing. And finally, even across in our timberlands research has developed a coated urea fertilizer, which is made with Weyerhaeuser technology. It basically allows you to put less fertilizer on the plant, but all of that fertilizer goes into the plant. So it reduces nitrogen volatility, which in turn reduces nitrous oxide emissions, which is a potent greenhouse gas. We have been using it on our southern timberlands since 2000, and last year we have started selling this externally, which plays an important role and potentially can play an important role for the agriculture community. So back to the U.S. greenhouse gas statistics here. I've just given examples of how Weyerhaeuser is producing products that can help slow the accumulation of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere in a number of these sectors. And finally, I'd like to leave it that trees are the original carbon and capture and storage technology. We need the freedom to be able to innovate and the market incentive to be able to provide more of these solutions. And as far as I'm concerned, there are endless possibilities, and we will be able to achieve our goal with trees. Thank you.